November 3, 1942, 28,000 feet above Lille, France. Major Gerhard Schöpfel of Jagdgeschwader 26 adjusted his oxygen mask and squinted through the armored glass of his Focke-Wulf 190 cockpit. Below him, a formation of American bombers crawled across the French countryside, trailing contrails like chalk lines on a blackboard. But it wasn't the bombers that captured his attention. Flanking the B-17 formation were 12 aircraft unlike anything Schöpfel had encountered in 3 years of combat. Twin booms, twin engines, a central nacelle that seemed to float between them like a gondola suspended from a bridge. The distinctive silhouette was unmistakable, Lockheed P-38 Lightnings of the 1st Fighter Group, making their combat debut over occupied Europe. Schöpfel keyed his radio, unable to suppress his amusement. Achtung, all fighters. The Americans have sent us their circus planes. Look at those ridiculous twin tails. They've brought their aviation mistakes to die over France. Laughter crackled through the radio net. To German pilots who had perfected their craft against Spitfires and Soviet Yaks, the ungainly American fighter appeared almost comical. The twin-boom configuration suggested a design compromise, an engineering failure dressed up as innovation. What Schöpfel didn't know, what none of the veteran Luftwaffe aces circling above the formation could have imagined, was that within minutes they would witness the beginning of their worst nightmare. The strange twin-boomed fighter they mocked would soon demonstrate performance capabilities that rendered every German fighter obsolete at altitude. Its speed in a dive would prove literally uncatchable. Its twin engines would carry pilots home through damage that would have doomed single-engine fighters. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Within 18 months, German pilots would develop a simple survival rule when encountering P-38s. Do not engage unless you hold overwhelming advantage in altitude, position, and numbers. Even then, be prepared to disengage immediately if the Lightning pilot knows his aircraft. The mockery would transform into fear, then into bitter respect for the aircraft that redefined high-altitude combat over Europe. The story of how German laughter turned to silence begins with a fundamental misunderstanding. The Luftwaffe, like most air forces in 1942, believed air combat was about maneuverability. Turn radius, climb rate, and agility in horizontal combat determined which fighter would prevail. The P-38 Lightning represented a completely different philosophy, one that German tacticians failed to recognize until it was far too late. Speed, altitude, concentrated firepower, these 3 factors would prove more valuable than turning ability. The Lightning's twin-boom design, dismissed as ungainly, was actually the key to its revolutionary performance. Those mocked twin tails housed twin Allison V1710 engines, each producing 1,150 horsepower. More importantly, each engine drove a turbocharger that maintained full power at altitudes where German fighters gasped for oxygen. The twin-boom configuration solved multiple problems simultaneously. It allowed the engines and turbochargers to be positioned optimally for cooling and efficiency. It placed the tail surfaces in undisturbed air behind the engines, improving control authority. Most critically, it permitted all armament to be concentrated in the central nacelle, firing straight ahead without convergence problems. 1 Hispano 20mm cannon and 4 Browning 50 caliber machine guns, all aligned on the aircraft's centerline. No wing-mounted weapons with ballistic paths that crossed at a specific convergence distance. Every round, fired by a P-38, traveled on a parallel trajectory, creating a cone of destruction that remained lethal from 100 yards to over 400 yards. German intelligence had studied the P-38's specifications when the aircraft first appeared over Europe in August 1942. The 55th Fighter Group, equipped with P-38F models, began flying from England that month. German analysts noted the twin-engine configuration, the distinctive twin booms, and the concentrated armament. Their assessment, filed at Luftwaffe headquarters in Berlin, reveals the complete failure to grasp what they were facing. The Lockheed P-38, the report stated, represents an American attempt to create a heavy fighter using twin engines to achieve range and payload. The unusual twin-boom configuration suggests structural compromises that likely impair maneuverability. Maximum speed is estimated at 400 miles per hour at altitude, comparable to our Messerschmitt Bf-109G. Climb performance is likely inferior due to excess weight. Assessment: suitable for bomber escort at high altitude, but vulnerable to our single-seat fighters in close combat. Every conclusion was wrong. Lieutenant Kurt Ebersberger, a 19-year-old pilot with Jagdgeschwader II, first encountered P-38s on November 10, 1942, during an interception mission over the Channel coast. His formation of 8 Bf-109Gs was climbing to engage B-17 bombers at 25,000 feet when the Lightning escort appeared above them at 30,000 feet. Ebersberger's flight leader, a veteran of the Eastern Front with 43 victories, assessed the situation quickly. Easy targets. They're too high to protect the bombers effectively. We'll go through them, then attack the formation. The German fighters continued climbing, expecting the American escorts to dive on them or turn to engage. Neither happened. Instead, the P-38s remained in position, holding their altitude advantage. As the Bf-109s reached 28,000 feet, engines straining in the thin air, 4 Lightnings rolled into nearly vertical dives. Ebersberger watched in fascination as the twin-boomed fighters accelerated downward, their dive angle so steep it appeared they'd lost control. At 22,000 feet, the P-38s leveled off directly ahead of the German formation, still travelling at tremendous speed. Ebersberger saw muzzle flashes from the lead Lightning's nose. The Bf-109 next to him simply disintegrated. No fire, no explosion, just instant structural failure as 20mm cannon shells and 50 caliber bullets tore through the fuselage at the rate of over 90 rounds per second. Before Ebersberger could react, the 4 P-38s had blown through the German formation and were climbing away, converting their speed back to altitude. He pushed his throttle forward and rolled to pursue, but the Lightnings were already at 25,000 feet and still climbing. His Bf-109, which had felt responsive seconds before, now wallowed in the thin air, unable to match the American climb rate. The entire engagement had lasted perhaps 20 seconds. 1 German fighter destroyed, 3 more damaged. 0 P-38s hit. The Americans regained their position above the bombers and continued the escort as if nothing had happened. Ebersberger's after-action report expressed confusion more than alarm. The enemy aircraft demonstrated exceptional dive speed and climb performance at altitude. Our advantage in maneuverability was negated by their refusal to engage horizontally. Recommend further study of their tactics. Further study would only confirm what Ebersberger had witnessed. The P-38 had changed the rules. The mockery continued even as evidence accumulated. German fighter pilots, accustomed to 3 years of almost continuous victory, could not accept that the ungainly American fighter represented genuine superiority. The twin-boom design looked wrong. The aircraft seemed too large, too complex, too different from established fighter architecture. Surely it was just another example of American industrial excess producing mediocre results. Hauptmann Hans Philipp, one of Germany's most successful aces with over 200 victories, encountered P-38s multiple times in late 1942. His assessment, shared with other squadron commanders, reveals the persistent German blindness to the Lightning's capabilities. The American twin-engine fighter is fast in a dive and has good high-altitude performance, but it cannot turn with us, cannot climb with us below 20,000 feet, and presents a large target. Our pilots should engage aggressively, using superior maneuverability to force close combat where our cannon will prove decisive. This advice would get German pilots killed by the dozens. The fundamental problem was that German fighter doctrine had been perfected against opponents who fought on German terms. Spitfires would turn and dogfight. Soviet fighters would engage in low-altitude melees. Even the early American P-40 Warhawks and P-39 Airacobras had accepted traditional combat geometry. The P-38 pilots, properly trained, simply refused to fight that way. American training programs emphasized the Lightning's strengths with almost fanatical focus. Altitude is life. Speed is life. Never turn with the enemy. These mantras were drilled into every P-38 pilot from their first day in the aircraft. The training syllabus at Muroc Army Airfield in California, where most Lightning pilots received their advanced instruction, was brutally specific. The P-38 is not a dogfighter, the training manual stated. It is an interceptor designed to climb above enemy formations, dive through them at high speed, destroy targets with concentrated firepower, then climb back to altitude using excess speed. Pilots who attempt to turn fight with enemy aircraft will lose their altitude advantage and their lives. The technical specifications backed up this philosophy. The twin Allison engines, each equipped with turbo superchargers developed by General Electric, could maintain sea-level power output to 30,000 feet. Above that altitude, they actually increased power as the thin air reduced back pressure on the turbos. At 35,000 feet, a P-38 could develop 1,300 horsepower per engine, while a Bf-109's Daimler-Benz DB605 struggled to produce 800 horsepower. The mathematics of aerial combat became simple at altitude. The P-38 could always climb higher than its opponent. From that height advantage, it could dive to any desired speed, attack with devastating firepower, then climb back to altitude before the enemy could respond. German fighters could neither catch the Lightning in a dive nor follow its climb. The vertical battlefield belonged entirely to America. Major Robert Littell, commanding the 14 Fighter Group's 48th Fighter Squadron, articulated the tactical revolution in a December 1942 letter to his wife. "We don't fight like the RAF boys do, turning and scissoring with Jerry. We're learning to use our airplane's real advantages. Yesterday we bounced some 109s at 28,000 feet. We dove on them from 32,000, probably hit 500 miles per hour in the dive. My guns destroyed one before he knew we were there. I pulled up to 30,000 feet using the speed from my dive. The Germans tried to follow but stalled out at 23,000. We did it again. 3 more were destroyed. They couldn't touch us." The speed Littell mentioned, 500 miles per hour in a dive, was actually a conservative estimate. P-38 pilots regularly exceeded that speed when diving from high altitude. The Lightning's clean aerodynamics and heavy weight combined to produce dive performance that approached the sound barrier, much closer than any German fighter could safely achieve. Luftwaffe test pilots who flew a captured P-38 in late 1942 reported with alarm that the aircraft could reach speeds where compressibility effects appeared, the onset of transonic flight where airflow over the wings approached supersonic velocity. At those speeds, control surfaces became partially ineffective, but the aircraft remained controllable enough to pull out of the dive. German fighters encountering similar speeds experienced violent buffeting, control reversal, and sometimes structural failure. The captured P-38 report, stamped secret and distributed to fighter group commanders, included a stark warning: this aircraft can dive faster than any fighter in the Luftwaffe inventory. Pilots attempting to follow a P-38 in a high-speed dive risk, exceeding structural limits. The American fighter can also outclimb our aircraft above 25,000 feet. Engagement should be avoided above that altitude unless significant numerical advantage is held. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So, if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. The warnings were largely ignored. German fighter pilots, conditioned by years of success, believed that skill and aggression could overcome technical disadvantage. They continued attacking P-38 formations using conventional tactics, and they continued dying in ways that made no sense according to traditional air combat theory. On January 15, 1943, the full extent of the Lightning's superiority became undeniable during a massive air battle over Lille. The 8th Air Force dispatched 100 B-17 bombers to attack German industrial targets, escorted by 48 P-38s from the 1st and 14 fighter groups. Luftwaffe controllers scrambled over 100 fighters to intercept, including aircraft from Jagdgeschwader 2, 26, and 54. The German battle plan was straightforward: use superior numbers to overwhelm the escort, then destroy the bombers. Experienced fighter controllers positioned Bf-109s and FW-190s at multiple altitudes from 15,000 to 30,000 feet, creating a layered defense that would force the P-38s to choose between protecting the bombers at their altitude or maintaining their own height advantage. What the Germans hadn't anticipated was that the P-38s could do both. As the bomber stream approached at 25,000 feet, 16 Lightnings maintained position directly above at 29,000 feet. When German fighters below attempted to climb toward the bombers, these high P-38s dove on them. Another 16 Lightnings flew level with the bombers, ready to engage any attackers that penetrated the high cover. The remaining 16 P-38s flew a weaving pattern above 32,000 feet, ready to counter any German fighters that tried to establish their own altitude advantage. Major Werner Mulders, a veteran ace leading a staffel from Jagdgeschwader 54, recognized the American tactical sophistication immediately. He radioed his fighters to avoid the high escorts and concentrate on the bombers from below. But as his 4-190 formation climbed through 23,000 feet, 4 P-38s dove on them from 29,000. Mulders saw them coming and called for his fighters to break and engage. It was exactly what the P-38 pilots wanted. The moment the German formation scattered, individual Turbocharged 190s became vulnerable to the diving Lightnings. Each P-38 selected a target, fired a 2-second burst from their concentrated nose armament, then pulled up and climbed away before German wingmen could respond. 4 WWIs fell in the first pass. 3 pilots were killed instantly, one managing to bail out with severe wounds. The surviving German fighters turned hard to pursue their attackers, but the P-38s were already back at 27,000 feet and climbing. By the time Mulders reformed his staffel, the Lightnings were above 30,000 feet again, untouchable and ready to repeat the process. The pattern continued for 40 minutes as the bomber stream crossed France. P-38s would dive, attack, climb back to altitude. German fighters would pursue briefly, fail to catch the climbing Lightnings, then become targets for the next diving attack. The Americans controlled the tempo of combat completely, engaging only when advantageous and disengaging at will. German after-action reports from the Lille mission reveal the depth of their tactical crisis. Oberleutnant Hans-Joachim Jabs, a night fighter ace temporarily flying day missions, wrote, "The American twin-boom fighters have made our standard tactics obsolete. We cannot climb to their altitude quickly enough. When we do reach their height, they simply dive away at speeds we cannot match. When we pursue, they convert speed to altitude and escape. When we don't pursue, they attack again. Our guns cannot reach them. Their guns destroy us effortlessly. This is not air combat, it is execution." The toll from the Lille mission was sobering. 18 German fighters were confirmed destroyed, 9 more damaged and written off, 21 pilots were killed, 4 P-38s lost, 3 to ground fire, 1 to a lucky deflection shot during a diving attack. None lost in direct air-to-air maneuvering combat. Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring demanded an explanation. How could the Luftwaffe, with superior numbers and years of combat experience, suffer such losses against a defensive escort force? The answer his staff provided was technically accurate but strategically useless. The P-38 holds altitude advantage. Our fighters cannot compete above 28,000 feet. Göring's response, reportedly delivered in a screaming rage, revealed his failure to grasp the fundamental shift. Then fly lower. Force them down where we hold advantage. But the P-38s wouldn't come down. They didn't have to. As long as they maintained altitude, they controlled the engagement geometry completely. By February 1943, P-38 operations over Europe had expanded significantly. The 82nd Fighter Group arrived with fresh aircraft and pilots trained specifically in high-altitude tactics. The 55th Fighter Group received P-38H models with improved turbochargers and more powerful engines. American fighter strength reached 120 Lightnings available for operations. German fighter commanders developed new tactical guidelines in response. Avoid combat above 25,000 feet. Attack only when holding altitude advantage. Use high-speed diving passes rather than pursuit. Disengage immediately if P-38s gain altitude superiority. These were defensive tactics, admission that the Luftwaffe could no longer dictate terms of engagement over their own occupied territory. The psychological impact rippled through German fighter units. Pilots who had entered the war confident in their superiority now flew with constant vigilance, scanning the sky above for twin-boom silhouettes. The distinctive configuration that had seemed comical in November now inspired dread, where the P-38s became the first question at every pre-mission briefing. Oberst Josef Priller, Commodore of Jagdgeschwader 26, one of the Luftwaffe's most elite units, summarized the situation in a March 1943 report to headquarters. The P-38 is the finest, high-altitude fighter currently in service. At altitudes above 25,000 feet, it is superior to both the Bf-109 and FW-190 in every measurable parameter except turn radius. Its speed, both in level flight and dive, is unmatched. Its climb performance above 23,000 feet is exceptional. Its armament is devastating at ranges beyond our effective fire zone. Priller continued with brutal honesty. We mock its ungainly appearance and twin-boom configuration. Our pilots joke about shooting it down easily. This is bravado masking fear. The truth is that a competently flown P-38 at altitude is nearly invulnerable to our attacks. We have lost too many excellent pilots pursuing these aircraft into vertical combat, where they hold every advantage. I recommend avoiding engagement unless absolutely necessary to protect bombers or ground forces. The recommendation was not formally adopted. The Luftwaffe's offensive fighter spirit, developed through years of victorious combat, made defensive tactics culturally unacceptable. German pilots were ordered to engage American escorts aggressively, regardless of altitude or tactical situation. More pilots died. The technical reality behind German fears became clearer as captured documents and interrogated pilots revealed exactly what they were facing. The P-38's performance specifications read like a wish list of advantages that individually would be significant, but combined created overwhelming superiority. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Maximum speed at 25,000 feet, 414 miles per hour. The Bf-109G managed 386 miles per hour at the same altitude. The WWII reached 408 miles per hour, but only below 20,000 feet. Above that altitude, the BMW radial engine's performance degraded rapidly. The Lightning actually got faster as it climbed, its turbocharged engines maintaining full power where German engines suffocated. Service ceiling, 44,000 feet. German fighters struggled to reach 35,000 feet, and above 30,000 feet they became almost uncontrollable, wallowing in air too thin to provide adequate lift for their wing loading. The P-38 could operate effectively 5,000 to 8,000 feet above the German ceiling, a height advantage that could never be overcome. Rate of climb above 25,000 feet, 2,900 feet per minute for the Lightning, 1,400 feet per minute for the Bf-109G. The disparity meant that even if a German pilot managed to reach the P-38's altitude, the American could climb away faster than the German could follow. Dive speed. The Lightning could exceed 570 miles per hour in a vertical dive from high altitude before encountering serious compressibility effects. German pilots reported their aircraft became uncontrollable above 460 miles per hour, with control surfaces locking up and violent buffeting that sometimes caused structural failure. P-38 pilots could literally dive away from any pursuit, knowing their enemy could not follow without risking their aircraft. But speed and altitude performance, while impressive, were only part of the story. The Lightning's armament represented a quantum leap in destructive capability. The concentrated nose battery eliminated the convergence problems that plagued all wing-mounted gun installations. On a Spitfire or Bf-109, the wing-mounted guns were typically harmonized to converge at 250 yards. Inside that range, the projectiles were still converging, spreading out across a wide area. Beyond that range, they diverged, again spreading the fire pattern. Only at the precise convergence distance did all guns' fire intersect at a single point. The P-38's guns never diverged. All 5 weapons, 1 20mm Hispano cannon and 4 50 caliber Browning machine guns, were mounted in the aircraft's nose, aligned parallel to each other and to the aircraft's center line. Every round travelled on a parallel trajectory. The fire pattern remained tight from 100 yards to beyond 500 yards. Lieutenant Richard Pete Peterson of the 20th Fighter Group described the effect in a letter home in March 1943. When you fire the Lightning's guns, it's like pointing a fire hose at the target. 50 caliber bullets and 20mm shells all going to exactly the same place. 2 seconds of fire, maybe 90 rounds total, and whatever you're shooting at just comes apart. I shot a 109 yesterday at 300 yards, 2-second burst, dead center hits. The entire tail section separated from the fuselage. The pilot never had a chance to bail out. The ammunition load backed up the firepower advantage. 150 rounds for the 20mm cannon, 500 rounds per gun for the 50 calibers. Total, 2,150 rounds of ammunition. At the combined rate of fire, that was approximately 35 seconds of continuous shooting, though combat doctrine recommended 2 to 3 second bursts. German fighters, by comparison, carried far less. The Bf-109 G6 carried 200 rounds for its single nose-mounted 20mm cannon and 300 rounds per gun for its 2 13mm machine guns. The WWII carried 250 rounds per cannon for its 2 wing-root 20mm weapons and 475 rounds per gun for its 2 13mm guns. The German weapons were individually more powerful, but suffered from limited ammunition and wing-mounting convergence in issues. More importantly, German cannon had a much lower rate of fire. The MG-151 20mm cannon in the Bf-109 fired at 750 rounds per minute. The Hispano cannon in the P-38 fired at 600 to 700 rounds per minute, a similar rate but with better ballistics and reliability. The real difference came from the 4 50 caliber Brownings, each firing at 800 rounds per minute. The combined rate of fire from all 5 Lightning guns was approximately 3,400 rounds per minute, creating a stream of projectiles that was literally impossible to fly through unscathed. Lieutenant Franz Stigler, who would later become famous for escorting a damaged B-17 bomber to safety, encountered P-38s over France in February 1943. His after-action report captured the lethality of the Lightning's armament. I positioned myself for a deflection shot on a Lightning at approximately 300 meters range. Before I could fire, his nose flashed. My aircraft was hit by what seemed like dozens of rounds simultaneously. The canopy shattered. The engine cowling was torn away. Hydraulic fluid sprayed everywhere. I broke off immediately and dove for the deck. Inspection after landing revealed 37 hits on my aircraft, all clustered in a 1-meter circle around the cockpit area. The American pilot fired for perhaps 1 second. In that second, he nearly killed me. The concentrated firepower had a psychological effect beyond its physical destruction. German pilots accustomed to cannon duels where both sides fired brief bursts found themselves facing an enemy who could sustain fire for seconds at a time, saturating the target area with projectiles. The 50 caliber bullets, while smaller than 20mm cannon shells, were devastating to aircraft structure. The armor-piercing incendiary rounds would penetrate the thin aluminum skin of German fighters, then ignite inside the fuselage, starting fires that quickly became uncontrollable. Captain Arthur Hayden of the 1st Fighter Group shot down 7 German fighters in the first 3 months of 1943, all with the P-38. His gun camera film, analysed by intelligence officers, revealed that his average combat engagement lasted 4 to 6 seconds and consumed 150 to 200 rounds of ammunition. 6 of his 7 victories showed catastrophic structural failure, aircraft literally torn apart by the concentrated fire. Hayden's tactical approach became standard for Lightning pilots over Europe. Establish altitude advantage, preferably 3,000 to 5,000 feet above enemy formations. wait for German fighters to commit to attacking bombers or engaging lower altitude escorts. Roll inverted and dive, building speed to over 450 miles per hour. Select a target and fire a 3 to 4 second burst from 300 to 400 yards. Pull up immediately into a zoom climb using the speed from the dive. Return to altitude and repeat. German fighters attempting to follow this attack pattern found it impossible. The diving Lightning would be traveling over 100 miles per hour faster than the pursuing German fighter could achieve. By the time the German pilot got his guns on target, the Lightning had already pulled up and was climbing away. Attempting to follow the zoom climb meant sacrificing speed, and the German fighter would stall out thousands of feet below the Lightning's regained altitude. The tactical revolution was complete. Air combat over Europe had become three-dimensional in a way it had never been before. The horizontal dogfight, the turning scissors, the pursuit curve, all the traditional geometry of air combat became irrelevant when one side controlled the vertical dimension completely. Hauptmann Johannes Steinhoff, a veteran ace with over 100 victories by mid-1943, articulated the helplessness in his personal diary. March 20th, we intercepted bombers over Wilhelmshaven. P-38s were the escort. We tried attacking from below, climbing to the bombers at full throttle. The Lightnings dove on us before we could reach the formation. They killed Lieutenant Hoffmann and Feldwebel Kunz in one pass. We turned to engage, but they were already climbing away. We couldn't follow. Our engines couldn't maintain power at that altitude. We tried diving away to disengage. They followed us down, staying behind us, out of our firing arc. When we pulled out of the dive, they were still there, in the perfect firing position. We lost Oberst W. Schmidt, 3 dead, 0 American losses. This isn't combat, it's target practice, and we're the targets. The industrial capacity behind the Lightning force multiplied German despair. By spring 1943, Lockheed's Burbank factory was producing P-38s at the rate of approximately 30 aircraft per week. Each Lightning that fell to German guns was replaced within days. German fighter production, while substantial, struggled to keep pace with losses on multiple fronts. Every experienced pilot lost over Western Europe was irreplaceable. The training pipeline disparity widened the gap further. American P-38 pilots arrived in theater with typically 300 to 400 hours of total flying time, including 75 to 100 hours in the Lightning itself. They had practiced formation flying, instrument navigation, gunnery against towed targets, and tactical maneuvers. Many had flown against captured German aircraft at training facilities, learning their opponents' capabilities firsthand. German replacement pilots by mid-1943 averaged 150 to 200 hours total time, with minimal tactical training. They learned combat tactics from squadron veterans during brief transition periods, then were thrown into battle against experienced American pilots flying superior aircraft. The predictable result was a rapidly increasing loss ratio. Lieutenant Robert Tyrrell of the 14 Fighter Group shot down his first German fighter on April 2, 1943, during his second combat mission. His 5th victory came on April 21, making him an ace in less than 3 weeks. Tyrrell's success wasn't exceptional. It was typical for Lightning pilots in early 1943. The combination of superior aircraft and superior training created a generation of American aces at a rate the Luftwaffe couldn't match. The April 17, 1943 mission to Bremen demonstrated the complete reversal of air superiority. 80 B-17 bombers attacked industrial targets in the city, escorted by 64 P-38s from 3 fighter groups. The Luftwaffe scrambled 140 fighters to intercept, their largest defensive effort to date. The German battle plan called for coordinated attacks from multiple directions, overwhelming the escort through sheer numbers, while specialized heavy fighter units armed with rockets attacked the bombers. On paper, it should have worked. In execution, it became a massacre. The P-38 formations split into 4 groups. 16 fighters maintained top cover at 33,000 feet, beyond the reach of any German fighter. 16 more flew at the bomber altitude, 25,000 feet, ready to engage any fighter that penetrated the high cover. 16 flew a weaving pattern between 28 and 30,000 feet, positioned to counter any German fighters attempting to climb to bomber altitude. The final 16 flew below the bombers at 22,000 feet, ready to engage any attacking from below. As German fighters approached from the east, climbing to intercept, the high P-38s dove on them. The initial pass destroyed 6 Bf-109s before the German formation could react. The survivors scattered, attempting to reform. As they did, the mid-level Lightnings attacked from a different angle, destroying 4 more fighters. When German fighters finally reached bomber altitude and began their attacks, the P-38s at that level engaged them directly while the high cover dove on any German fighter that tried to pursue the bombers. The pattern repeated across the entire engagement zone. Coordinated American attacks from multiple altitudes prevented German fighters from concentrating their strength. Lightning formations engaged, destroyed German fighters, then climbed back to altitude to repeat the process. German pilots found themselves constantly reacting, never able to execute their planned attacks. Major Heinz Baer, one of Germany's most successful aces, led a grouper from Jagdgeschwader 1 during the Bremen mission. His post-mission report was unusually blunt. The American escort tactics have reached a level of sophistication we cannot counter with current aircraft and tactics. They stack their fighters vertically, covering each other at multiple altitudes. When we attack at any level, fighters above dive on us. When we try to climb to their highest altitude, they simply climb higher. Our only successes came when we caught isolated Lightning below 20,000 feet, and even then our losses were unacceptable. The final tally from Bremen: 32 German fighters confirmed destroyed by P-38s, 14 more claimed as probable. 4 Lightnings lost, 3 to ground fire, 1 to a collision during combat maneuvers. Not a single bomber was shot down by German fighters. The mission, which should have demonstrated Luftwaffe strength through overwhelming numbers, instead revealed their complete inability to contest American air superiority above 25,000 feet. The psychological impact on German fighter units was profound. Oberleutnant Emil Lang, an ace with 60 victories, most scored, on the Eastern Front, was temporarily transferred to defend German airspace in May 1943. After his first encounter with P-38s, he requested immediate return to Russia. His explanation, preserved in unit records, was stark. "I would rather face an entire Soviet fighter regiment than 4 P-38s. Against the Russians, I have a chance. Against the Lightning at altitude, I am helpless." By June 1943, the mockery that had characterized German attitudes toward the P-38 had evaporated completely. Intelligence bulletins circulated to fighter units included detailed recognition guides for the Lightning, tactical suggestions for engagement, and explicit warnings about its capabilities. One bulletin, dated June 12th, included photographs of the twin-boom fighter from multiple angles with the caption, "This aircraft is superior to all German fighters above 25,000 feet. Avoid engagement unless holding an overwhelming altitude advantage." The transformation was complete. In 7 months, the ungainly American fighter with its mocked twin-boom configuration had become the most feared aircraft in German skies. The laughter had died with German pilots, who learned too late that the P-38's unusual design wasn't a compromise, it was the key to its dominance. The summer of 1943 marked the beginning of what German pilots would later call the Lightning season, a period when P-38 operations intensified to the point where avoiding them became impossible. The 55th, 28th and 82nd Fighter Groups all operated P-38s over Europe, with more squadrons arriving monthly. By August, over 200 Lightnings were available for operations, enough to provide fighter escort for every major bombing mission. German fighter commanders adjusted tactics yet again, but each adjustment revealed new Lightning advantages. When they tried attacking from the sun, P-38 formations stacked vertically ensured fighters above could spot the attackers. When they attempted surprise attacks from cloud cover, the Lightning's twin engines provided redundancy that allowed pilots to escape even with one engine damaged. When they focused on destroying individual stragglers, Coordinated American tactics ensured no Lightning flew alone. Lieutenant Jack Ilfrey of the 94th Fighter Squadron became one of the most successful Lightning pilots in the European theatre through systematic exploitation of German tactical errors. His technique, refined through dozens of combat missions, represented the perfection of vertical combat doctrine. Ilfrey would position his flight at 32,000 feet, well above any German fighters. When enemy aircraft appeared below, he would study their formation carefully, identifying the most vulnerable targets, typically fighters on the outside edges of defensive formations. He would then roll inverted, dive to approximately 500 miles per hour, level off 4,000 to 5,000 feet above the target, make a single high-speed pass, then zoom climb back to altitude. The entire attack sequence took less than 30 seconds. German fighters barely had time to react before Ilfrey's Lightning was back at altitude, reforming with his flight, ready to repeat the process. In one mission over the Ruhr on August 12, 1943, Ilfrey destroyed 3 Fluff 190s using this technique, all within 12 minutes, without ever descending below 22,000 feet. His gun camera footage, preserved in the National Archives, shows the clinical efficiency of the attacks. First pass, 2-second burst, Fair 190's wing separates, aircraft tumbles earthward, climb back to altitude. Second pass, 3-second burst, Fu 190 explodes in mid-air, no parachute visible, climb back to altitude. Third pass, 2-second burst, Fu 190's engine catches fire, pilot bails out, climb back to altitude. Total ammunition expended, approximately 350 rounds. Total time in combat, 12 minutes. Total altitude lost, 0 feet. The Luftwaffe's response to this impossible tactical situation was to develop specialized high-altitude variants of their fighters. The Bf-109K series, introduced in autumn 1943, featured a pressurized cockpit and improved supercharger, designed to restore performance above 25,000 feet. The results were disappointing. While the 109K could reach 35,000 feet, its performance at that altitude remained marginal. The P-38 could still outclimb it, still outdive it, and still maintain better control authority in thin air. The pressurization system proved unreliable, frequently failing during combat maneuvers. Pilots reported that even when functioning properly, the increased altitude capability didn't translate to tactical advantage against Lightnings that could always climb higher. Oberleutnant Günther Röhl, one of Germany's highest-scoring aces with over 250 victories, flew the Bf-109K against P-38s in October 1943. His assessment was brutally honest. The K model climbs better than earlier variants. It can reach 35,000 feet, which previous models could barely achieve. But the Americans are at 38,000 or 40,000 feet. When we finally reach our ceiling, gasping for altitude, they simply climb higher. Then they dive on us from above. The improved altitude performance is meaningless when facing an aircraft with 5,000 feet more ceiling. The introduction of the P-38J model in August 1943 widened the performance gap even further. The J model featured improved intercoolers that reduced the tendency for engines to overheat during prolonged climbs. The improved cooling allowed pilots to use maximum continuous power for extended periods, increasing climb rate and high-altitude performance. More significantly, the J model introduced hydraulically boosted ailerons that dramatically improved roll rate. The original P-38 had sluggish roll response at high speeds, one of its few weaknesses. The boosted ailerons eliminated this problem, giving the Lightning excellent roll characteristics across its entire speed range. Lieutenant Colonel Jack Jenkins, commanding the 55th Fighter Group's 38th Fighter Squadron, described the improvement in a November 1943 report. The J model rolls like a dream. You can snap into a high-speed roll at 400 miles per hour, and the aircraft responds instantly. This gives us a huge advantage in deflection shooting. I can track a maneuvering target with continuous small roll corrections, keeping my guns on target for longer bursts. The Germans can't match this. Their aircraft either roll too slowly to track, or they're going too fast to shoot accurately. German pilots noticed the change immediately. The earlier P-38s had been vulnerable during the brief moment when pulling out of a dive, when the aircraft was transitioning from vertical to horizontal flight. Alert German pilots could sometimes get a snapshot during this window. The J model's improved roll rate eliminated even this small advantage. Lightning pilots could now roll during the pullout, presenting constantly changing deflection angles that made accurate shooting nearly impossible. By December 1943, German fighter losses to P-38s had become unsustainable. Jagdgeschwader II, one of the most experienced units in the Luftwaffe, lost 47 pilots in 3 months of operations over Western Europe. Jagdgeschwader 26 lost 38 pilots in the same period. Jagdgeschwader 11 lost 52. Many of these losses came from veteran pilots, aces with 20, 30, even 50 victories, shot down by American pilots flying their first or second combat missions. Human mathematics was inexorable. Germany was losing experienced pilots it could not replace. America was producing new pilots faster than Germany could shoot them down. And the American pilots were arriving in aircraft that held technical superiority at the altitudes where combat occurred. The mission that finally shattered any remaining German confidence in their ability to contest high-altitude air superiority occurred on January 11, 1944. Codenamed Operation Argument, it was the deepest penetration into German airspace attempted to date, targeting aircraft factories at Oschersleben and Halberstadt. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work, so if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. The escort force included 92 P-38s, the largest Lightning formation ever assembled over Europe. The Luftwaffe responded with over 300 fighters, determined to break up the bomber formations before they reached their targets. For the first time, German fighters were present in numbers sufficient to overwhelm the escorts through sheer quantity. On paper, the Germans should have won. The battle that developed over central Germany became the largest air combat of the European war to that date, and it demonstrated conclusively that numerical superiority meant nothing when facing technically superior aircraft flown by well-trained pilots. The P-38 formations split into multiple groups, each operating at different altitudes from 28,000 to 38,000 feet. As German fighters climbed to intercept, the highest Lightnings dove on them. As the Germans reacted to the high attacks, mid-level Lightnings engaged from different angles. The coordination was flawless, the execution devastating. Major Walter Beckham, flying his first mission as commanding officer of the 36th Fighter Squadron, shot down 5 German fighters in a single engagement, becoming an ace in one mission. His wingman destroyed 3 more. Every P-38 in Beckham's flight scored at least 1 victory. The entire engagement lasted 18 minutes. 8 German fighters destroyed by 1 flight of 4 Lightnings. Across the entire battle zone, the pattern repeated. Coordinated P-38 attacks from multiple altitudes prevented German fighters from concentrating their strength. Every attempt to attack the bombers meant exposing themselves to diving Lightnings. Every attempt to engage the escorts meant fighting on American terms, in vertical combat, where the twin-boom fighters held overwhelming advantage. The final tally shocked both sides. 63 German fighters were destroyed by P-38s, 37 more claimed as probable. 5 Lightnings lost, 3 to ground fire, 2 to collisions during the massive furball. The bomber formations, protected by the Lightning screen, lost 11 aircraft to fighters and flak combined, an acceptable loss rate that allowed the mission to be classified as a success. But the real impact was psychological. German fighter pilots who survived the Oschersleben mission returned to base, describing the battle in terms of hopeless odds and overwhelming firepower. Several pilots refused to fly further missions against heavy fighter escorts. 2 experienced aces requested transfer to other fronts. Unit cohesion in several Jagdgeschwader began breaking down as pilots lost faith in their ability to survive against the Lightning-escorted missions. General Lieutenant Adolf Galland, commander of German fighter forces, visited frontline units in late January 1944 to assess morale. His private notes, captured after the war, reveal the depth of the crisis. The pilots speak of the P-38 with something approaching terror. They describe it as unkillable, able to absorb damage that would destroy two normal fighters. They report Lightning pilots who seem to have unlimited ammunition, who can maintain fire for impossible durations. They tell stories of diving attacks so fast that reaction is impossible, of zoom climbs that leave our fighters stalled out thousands of meters below. Most disturbingly, they no longer believe we can win the air war. The technical superiority of American aircraft, combined with their industrial capacity and training, has convinced many pilots that continued resistance is futile. The P-38's dominance extended beyond pure fighter combat. Lightning pilots increasingly took on ground attack missions, strafing airfields, rail lines, and supply convoys. The twin engines provided safety during low-altitude operations, allowing the aircraft to return home even with one engine shot out. The concentrated nose armament proved devastating against ground targets, the 50 caliber bullets walking across targets like a zipper of destruction. Lieutenant Lyndall Graham of the 20th Fighter Group specialized in airfield attacks, strafing German bases at dawn when aircraft were lined up for morning operations. His technique was to approach at low altitude, 20 to 30 feet above the ground, flying at maximum speed. The concentrated fire from his nose guns would destroy multiple aircraft in a single pass before defensive guns could respond. Graham destroyed 17 German aircraft on the ground in February and March 1944, adding to his 5 aerial victories. German bases attempted various defensive measures. They dispersed aircraft more widely, making each attack less productive. They reinforced light flak positions around airfield perimeters. They stationed fighters on alert to intercept low-flying attackers. Nothing worked consistently. The P-38's speed made it difficult to track with flak. Its armor protected the pilot and engines from light ground fire, and Lightning pilots who completed their strafing runs could simply light the afterburners and zoom climb to altitude faster than any German fighter could pursue. By spring 1944, the air war over Europe had been effectively decided. The introduction of the P-51 Mustang with its extreme range would receive more historical attention, but the P-38 had already broken the Luftwaffe's fighter arm. The Mustang's arrival simply accelerated Germany's inevitable defeat. The statistics from the first 18 months of P-38 operations over Europe tell the story plainly. Lightning pilots claimed over 750 German aircraft destroyed in aerial combat, with another 300 destroyed on the ground. P-38 losses to enemy aircraft totaled 143. The kill ratio exceeded 5-1, the highest of any American fighter operating over Europe in that period. More importantly, the P-38 had achieved air superiority above 25,000 feet, forcing German fighters to operate at lower altitudes where they remained vulnerable to other Allied fighters and ground fire. The psychological impact of Lightning dominance extended far beyond the numbers, breaking German pilot morale and convincing even veteran aces that the air war was lost. In post-war interviews, German fighter pilots consistently ranked the P-38 as the most formidable opponent they faced, more feared than Spitfires, more respected than Mustangs. General Major Johannes Steinhoff, who survived the war with 176 victories, summarized German attitudes in a 1968 interview. "We laughed when we first saw the P-38. The twin booms, the unconventional design, it seemed like American industrial excess producing an ungainly compromise. We were completely wrong. The Lightning was the finest high-altitude fighter of the war. Above 25,000 feet, it was unbeatable. It could fly higher than we could reach, dive faster than we could follow, and climb away from any pursuit. Its guns were devastating. Its pilots were well-trained and disciplined, and there were always more of them." Steinhoff continued, his voice carrying the weight of experience. The real genius of the P-38 was that it didn't try to fight like a European fighter. It created its own rules of combat, rules where American advantages in altitude, performance, and firepower determined the outcome. We could never adapt to fighting on their terms because our aircraft simply couldn't perform at the altitudes where Lightnings operated. The twin-boom configuration we mocked was actually the key to its dominance. Those booms housed the turbochargers that gave it altitude superiority. They provided clean airflow to the tail surfaces for better control at extreme altitudes. The design we thought was a weakness was actually its greatest strength. The twin Allison engines that had seemed like unnecessary complexity proved to be lifesavers. Hundreds of P-38 pilots returned from missions with one engine shot out, the remaining engine providing enough power to make it home. German single-engine fighters with comparable damage simply fell from the sky. The redundancy built into the Lightning's design reflected American engineering philosophy: reliability through overbuilding, survivability through redundancy. Lieutenant Robert Woody, of the 1st Fighter Group, survived a mission over Austria in March 1944 that would have killed any single-engine pilot. His P-38 took hits from a Bf-109 that destroyed the left engine, severed control cables, and punctured the left boom in multiple places. Woody shut down the damaged engine, feathered the propeller, and flew 300 miles back to base on the right engine alone. The aircraft was damaged so severely that it was written off upon landing. But Woody walked away without injury and was flying combat missions again within a week. German pilots who witnessed such survivability developed a grudging respect that bordered on superstition. Stories circulated of P-38s that absorbed dozens of cannon hits and continued flying, of Lightnings that returned to base with entire sections of wing or tail shot away, of American pilots who walked away from crashes that should have been fatal. The twin-boom fighter acquired an aura of invincibility that further eroded German morale. The mockery that had characterized initial German reactions to the P-38 had transformed into something far different by 1945. In the final months of the war, when fuel shortages and pilot attrition had reduced the Luftwaffe to a shadow force, the sight of twin-boom silhouettes at altitude inspired not contempt, but fear. German pilots learned to scan the sky above constantly, knowing that Lightning attacks came from angles and altitudes they could never reach. The psychological reversal was complete. The aircraft Germans had laughed at in November 1942 had become the symbol of American air superiority, proof that unconventional design backed by sound engineering could revolutionize warfare. The twin booms that seemed ungainly housed the systems that made high-altitude dominance possible. The concentrated nose armament that seemed unnecessary proved devastating in combat. The twin engines that seemed like excess weight provided the redundancy that brought pilots home. In the final accounting, the P-38 Lightning claimed more aerial victories in the Pacific theater, where its range and twin-engine reliability were even more valuable. But over Europe, it achieved something equally important. It broke the myth of Luftwaffe invincibility. It proved that technical superiority could overcome experience and aggression. It demonstrated that American industrial capacity could produce highly complex aircraft in quantities that overwhelmed German defenses. The Lightning pilots who flew those missions over occupied Europe wrote their own chapter in aviation history. Many became aces, some became legends, but all contributed to a fundamental shift in aerial warfare, the transition from horizontal dogfighting to three-dimensional combat, where altitude and speed determined survival. The P-38 didn't just win battles, it redefined what fighter combat meant. German pilots who survived the war carried memories of the twin-boom fighter for the rest of their lives. In reunions decades later, veterans would speak quietly of the Lightning, remembering the distinctive silhouette, the sound of its engines, the devastating fire from its nose guns. The mockery had long since faded, replaced by the knowledge that they had faced the finest high-altitude fighter of its era and survived. The P-38's legacy extends beyond World War II. Its influence shaped post-war fighter development worldwide. The importance of high-altitude performance, demonstrated so convincingly by the Lightning, became a critical design parameter for jet fighters. The value of concentrated nose-mounted armament influenced aircraft design for decades. The twin-engine configuration, while not widely adopted, proved that unconventional solutions could achieve revolutionary results. At the National Museum of the United States Air Force in Dayton, Ohio, a restored P-38J sits among other legendary aircraft. Its twin booms gleam under display lights, the distinctive configuration as striking today as it was in 1942. The placard describes its specifications and combat record. But the real story is told in the memories of men who flew it and men who fought against it. For American pilots, the Lightning represented confidence, the knowledge that they flew the best high-altitude fighter in the world. For German pilots, it represented the moment when technical superiority shifted permanently to their enemies, when the rules of combat changed in ways they could not counter. The ungainly twin-boom design that inspired mockery became the symbol of American air power, proof that innovation and industrial might could overcome tactical tradition. The transformation from November 1942 to May 1945 was total and irreversible. The laughter died in the frozen air above 25,000 feet, silenced by the thunder of concentrated firepower and the reality of performance that could not be matched. German pilots learned too late that the P-38's unusual configuration wasn't a weakness to exploit, but a strength they could never overcome. In the end, the Lightning did more than shoot down German fighters. It shattered German confidence, proved American technical capability, and demonstrated that the future of aerial warfare belonged to nations that could combine innovative design with industrial capacity and superior training. The twin-boom fighter that seemed so wrong in 1942 proved devastatingly right where it mattered most. In the thin, cold air above Europe, where altitude meant life, and the Lightning ruled supreme. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.